The night was darker than usual, cloaked in the heavy silence of a small American town. It was the late 1980s, when the world was changing fast. Wall Street was booming. Technology was on the rise, but here in this sleepy town of Raven Creek, old family rivalries still ruled more than the law. The Harrington family and the Caldwell family had lived side by side for decades, bound by business, blood, and secrets. To outsiders, they looked like allies sharing Sunday church pews, trading pleasantries at town gatherings, but behind closed doors. Greed and envy had poisoned their bond. Thomas Harrington, a man with steel in his eyes and ambition carved into his soul, wanted more than half of everything. He wanted it all. The Caldwell family's land, their businesses, their reputation. Thomas believed it should have belonged to him. One stormy night, he made his move. Inside the Grand Harrington estate, a secret meeting was taking place. Thomas and his most loyal men sat in a dimly lit study, the smell of cigar smoke thick in the air. On the oak table lay documents, forged papers, and plans that would destroy the Caldwell family forever. "They won't know what hit them," one of his men whispered. Thomas smirked. "By the time dawn breaks, the Caldwells will be nothing but dust beneath our boots. Their empire will be ours, their name forgotten." What Thomas didn't know was that betrayal has a way of circling back. That very night, violence erupted. Fires burned on Caldwell property. Men were beaten in the streets, and by morning, Edward Caldwell, the patriarch, was found dead in his own office, his death ruled an accident. But everyone in Raven Creek knew better. The Caldwell family crumbled. Their wealth disappeared overnight, their allies turned away, and their lands were signed over to the Harringtons through legal means. But amid the chaos, one soul survived unnoticed, a child. Hidden away by a loyal servant, little Michael Caldwell watched his world collapse. His mother, broken and powerless, whispered to him in the dead of night before sending him away, "Never forget who you are. Never forgive what they did. One day you will return. And when you do, remember this: blood calls for blood." The boy was taken far from Raven Creek, raised under a new identity, his past buried deep. But inside him, the fire of revenge never died. Each year, the memory of his father's murder, his mother's tears, and the Harrington name carved deeper into his soul. That night in 1987 became the origin of a legacy, blood oath written not on paper, but in pain. The train screeched as it rolled into Chicago's Union Station, its iron wheels grinding against the tracks. Among the sea of passengers, a boy of barely 10 years stepped out, clutching the calloused hand of an old servant named Henry. His eyes were swollen from days of crying, but his jaw was set in a way no child should ever be. This boy was Michael Caldwell, though from this moment forward, he would not be allowed to carry that name. Henry bent down and whispered, "From now on, you are Michael Carter? Remember, if anyone asks, you've never heard of the Caldwell family. Forget your past, at least on the surface. Do you understand?" Michael nodded silently. Inside, he understood far too well. His family had been erased, and with them, his childhood. A childhood in shadows. Michael grew up in a small apartment on the south side of Chicago. Henry, who once served the Caldwell family, now worked long shifts as a janitor just to keep food on the table. Life was hard sometimes. There wasn't enough money for electricity. Sometimes Michael wore the same pair of shoes until they fell apart, but Henry always reminded him of his purpose. At night, before bed, Henry would whisper the truth Michael was never allowed to speak out loud. "They stole everything from you. But mark my words, boy, the Harringtons will choke on their greed. One day you'll take back what they took." Michael didn't play with toys like other children. Instead, he buried himself in books Henry scavenged from thrift shops, law, business, history. He read about power, about strategy, about men who had lost everything and rebuilt themselves from the ashes. By the age of 15, Michael wasn't just smart, he was calculating. Teachers noticed his brilliance, his ability to manipulate arguments, his sharp wit, but they also noticed something darker, a coldness in his eyes, a hunger for more than good grades. The making of a man. When Henry grew sick and eventually passed away, Michael was left alone. But by then, he had already built himself into something formidable. He earned scholarships, studied economics and law, and even started small businesses on the side. While his classmates partied and wasted their youth, Michael worked. He studied late nights in libraries, invested small amounts of money into stocks, flipped broken cars, and learned every skill he thought he might one day need. And with every success, he remembered the faces of the Harringtons, the family, who had stolen his bloodline. Years passed. Michael grew into a man not just of knowledge, but of presence. He had the kind of charisma that made people follow him, and the kind of ruthlessness that made people fear him. By 30, he had built a quiet fortune. Nothing flashy. Nothing public, just enough to prepare for the day he knew was coming. The whisper of Raven Creek. One evening, as Michael sat alone in his high-rise apartment overlooking the city, he received a call from an old contact. "Have you heard?" the voice said. "The Harrington family. They're stronger than ever, but not unbreakable. Their empire has cracks. People talk. Enemies multiply?" Michael swirled the whiskey in his glass, his reflection cold in the window. Raven Creek, his birthplace, his curse was calling him back. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at his lips. "It's time," he whispered. Return of the forgotten child. Weeks later, a black car pulled into Raven Creek. The small town looked the same, but to Michael it felt like stepping into a graveyard of ghosts. He walked the streets, unnoticed, just another stranger in a tailored suit. But beneath the surface, every brick, every tree, every corner carried the weight of memory. The Harrington estate still stood tall at the edge of town, a monument of stolen wealth. Its gates were iron, its windows glowing with the light of luxury. Inside, the Harringtons lived without fear, never imagining that the child they had once left for dead was back, watching. Michael clenched his fists. This wasn't just a return. It was the beginning of something much darker. The boy who had once been forgotten was forgotten no more. He had come home not to live, not to forgive, but to claim blood for blood. The air in Raven Creek carried a strange weight, like time itself had slowed down, trapping the town in its old grudges and hidden sins. Michael parked his sleek black sedan outside the Raven Creek Inn, a modest yet elegant hotel that catered to out-of-town businessmen. To the locals, he was just another visitor. To himself, he was a wolf stepping back into the fold of sheep. He signed in under the name Michael Carter, careful not to stir suspicion. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, smiled politely. "Here for business, sir?" she asked. Michael's lips curved slightly. "Yes, business. A town that never forgets." The next morning, Michael walked the streets. The bakery on Main Street still smelled of cinnamon rolls. The barber shop still had the old red and white striped pole. Even the park where children once played looked the same, though the children were strangers now. But what struck him most was how unchanged the Harrington estate appeared. On the edge of town, like a king's castle lording over peasants, its white columns and manicured lawns screamed of wealth. To anyone else, it was beautiful. To Michael, it was a scar. The Harringtons of today. Inside the estate, the Harrington family had changed faces, but not nature. Richard Harrington, the current patriarch, was Thomas Harrington's eldest son. In his 50s, sharp-suited, silver-haired, and ruthless in business, Richard carried his father's arrogance like a crown. Evelyn Harrington, his wife, was a woman of charm and ambition, known for hosting lavish town gatherings and keeping her influence polished like her jewelry. Their children, Daniel and Charlotte, represented the new generation. Daniel, the golden boy, managed the family businesses with an iron hand but a reputation for cruelty. Charlotte, the younger one, was different, quiet, observant, and perhaps the only Harrington not completely corrupted by greed. Michael studied them from a distance at first, gathering information like a hunter stalking prey. He paid off bartenders, chatted with old townsfolk, and even bribed a clerk at the county office for access to Harrington financial records. He discovered what he needed. The Harringtons looked strong on the outside, but their empire had cracks, hidden debts, fragile partnerships, and enemies waiting for an opportunity. Michael intended to be that opportunity. Michael's first step was subtle. He invested quietly in a small, local construction company that the Harringtons often hired for their projects. Within weeks, he had influence over their supply chains. A delayed shipment here, a sudden shortage there, small annoyances, nothing more, but enough to rattle Daniel Harrington's temper. One evening at the town's only upscale bar, Michael overheard Daniel snapping at a supplier. "You think you can make me wait? Do you know who I am? I'll ruin you." Michael sipped his drink nearby, concealing a smirk. The Harrington temper was still as volatile as ever. Good. Anger made enemies sloppy. But Raven Creek had long memories. One afternoon, while walking past the old library, Michael heard a voice call out, "Michael? Michael Caldwell?" He froze. The name he had buried for decades pierced the air like a knife. Turning, he saw an elderly woman, Mrs. Whitmore, his childhood neighbor. Her eyes widened with disbelief. "I'd know those eyes anywhere. You're Edward Caldwell's boy, aren't you?" Michael's heart pounded. For a moment, he considered denying it. But something in her gaze, the recognition, the warmth stopped him. "Yes," he said quietly, "but you mustn't tell anyone." Tears filled the woman's eyes. "Your father was a good man. What they did to him, to your family, it was a crime. Don't let them know you're back, Michael. The Harringtons still hold this town in their fist." Michael placed a hand gently on hers. "Don't worry. I didn't come back to live under their shadow. I came back to end it." The old woman's eyes widened further, but Michael walked away before she could ask more. That night, Michael stood on a hill overlooking the Harrington estate. The mansion glowed with golden light, laughter and music spilling from its windows. Another lavish dinner, another display of power, but Michael saw something different. He saw his father's blood on those polished floors. He saw his mother's tears in those glowing chandeliers. He saw the fire that had burned his childhood to ash. And as the wind howled through the trees, he whispered to himself, "This town forgot me, but I never forgot them. The Harrington name will fall, piece by piece, brick by brick, life by life, until the last of them begs for mercy." Michael Carter had returned to Raven Creek. Michael Caldwell had been reborn. The rain came down hard that evening, turning the streets of Raven Creek slick and gleaming under the dim streetlights. Michael sat in his car across from the Harrington offices, watching the movement inside through tinted glass. Men in suits hurried out with briefcases, cars pulled in and out of the lot, and the entire building glowed like a fortress of wealth. But Michael knew every fortress had its weak points. He had spent weeks gathering information, digging through financial records, bribing secretaries, and following paper trails. The Harrington Empire looked strong from the outside, but beneath its golden walls, it was bleeding. Quiet debts to shadowy investors, suspicious offshore accounts, contracts written on shaky ground all hidden from the public eye. Michael smiled coldly as he inserted a flash drive into his laptop. On the screen glowed documents that could expose years of corruption. He wasn't going to reveal them yet. No, not now. Revenge wasn't about striking once. It was about striking again and again until the enemy broke completely. The first blow would be financial. The next morning, Raven Creek woke to whispers. A Harrington development project had been mysteriously delayed. A bank quietly pulled funding from one of their ventures. A partner withdrew from a contract at the last second. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to plant doubt in the minds of those who trusted. Richard Harrington's empire. Inside the Harrington estate, tempers flared. Richard slammed his hand on the dining table, startling Evelyn and their children. "Someone is sabotaging us," he growled. "Contracts don't just fall apart overnight. Banks don't just walk away." Daniel leaned forward, his jaw clenched. "I'll find out who. No one crosses this family and gets away with it." Charlotte, sitting quietly at the end of the table, spoke softly. "Maybe it's just business, Father. Not everyone who leaves is an enemy." Richard shot her a glare sharp enough to silence her. To him, the world had only two kinds of people, allies or enemies. And he believed the Harrington name was untouchable. Michael watched all of this unfold from the shadows, listening to whispers from informants he had carefully paid. The Harringtons were rattled, exactly as he wanted. They didn't yet know they were up against someone who knew them better than they knew themselves. Later that week, Michael attended a town fundraiser hosted by Evelyn Harrington. The event was held in the grand ballroom of the estate, chandeliers sparkling above the heads of Raven Creek's wealthiest citizens. Michael walked through the doors in a tailored black suit, blending in as if he belonged. No one recognized him, not yet. He sipped his drink and moved with practiced ease through the crowd, listening, smiling politely, all while studying his enemies. Richard stood in the center, commanding attention with his booming voice. Daniel hovered nearby, arrogant and restless. Evelyn charmed the guests with practiced elegance. And Charlotte's eyes lingered on Michael for a moment too long. There was curiosity in her gaze, maybe even recognition she couldn't quite place. Michael felt it too. Unlike the others, she didn't carry herself with arrogance. There was something softer in her eyes, something human. When she finally approached him, her voice was gentle. "I don't think I've seen you around Raven Creek before." "New in town?" Michael offered a polite smile. "Business brought me here. I thought I'd stay a while." Her head tilted slightly. "And how do you like it so far?" He let his eyes wander around the glittering room before meeting hers again. "It's exactly what I expected. Some things never change." She studied him for a moment, almost as if she sensed the weight behind his words. But before she could ask more, Daniel barged into the conversation, his tone sharp. "Charlotte, don't waste your time with strangers. This man's not important." Michael's jaw tightened, but he kept his smile. "Strangers often become the most important people, don't they?" Daniel sneered but walked away, pulling his sister with him. Michael's smirk faded as he turned back to his drink. The game had begun. By the end of the night, whispers about Harrington instability spread quietly among Raven Creek's elite. Michael had planted a few of them himself, nudging conversations here and there, feeding the fire of doubt. When he left the estate, the rain had stopped, and the moon hung low over the mansion. Michael paused at the gates, staring at the symbol of everything stolen from him. "You don't know it yet," he murmured, "but your walls are already cracking." The Harrington family slept soundly that night, unaware that their downfall had already begun. And somewhere deep in the quiet dark of Raven Creek, the forgotten child of the Caldwells was sharpening his blade. Not of steel, but of patience, strategy, and vengeance. Daniel Harrington liked to think of himself as untouchable. Every night he drank at the Raven Creek Country Club, bragged about his wealth, and flaunted women who were too young and too desperate to say no. To the town, he was power wrapped in arrogance. To Michael, he was the weakest link in the Harrington chain. It started with a single envelope. Daniel found it slipped under the door of his office one morning, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, Daniel, with a woman who was very much not his fiancée. His face drained of color as he stared at the image. His first instinct was anger, his second was panic. If Evelyn or Richard ever saw this, his reputation in Raven Creek would crumble. Michael, sitting in his hotel room, watched from afar. He hadn't taken the photo himself, he didn't need to. Daniel's recklessness was public enough. All Michael had done was pay the right person to capture it and deliver it. The photo was bait, a small taste of fear. Within days, Daniel was spiraling. He snapped at employees, drank harder, and made careless mistakes. One night, after a heavy dose of whiskey, he staggered out of the club and into the rain. Michael followed him quietly, keeping to the shadows. Daniel's car swerved dangerously on the wet road, finally skidding to a stop near the edge of the old bridge outside town. Michael parked a distance away, watching. Daniel stumbled out, cursing loudly, throwing an empty bottle into the river below. "You think you can break me?" Daniel shouted into the night, though there was no one there. "I'm a Harrington. Nobody touches me." Michael stepped closer, silent as a ghost. He wanted to push him, wanted to end him right there, but that wasn't the plan. Revenge wasn't about mercy, but neither was it about rushing. Instead, he whispered just loud enough for Daniel to hear, letting his voice carry through the rain. "Everyone breaks, Daniel." Daniel spun around, eyes wide, but the road was empty. He shouted, demanded whoever was there to show themselves, but the night answered with nothing but silence. Dripping wet, shivering, he scrambled back into his car and sped off, heart pounding. Michael stood in the shadows, satisfied. Fear was beginning to take root. By the end of the week, Daniel's paranoia was obvious. He started hiring private investigators, convinced someone was following him. He accused employees of betrayal, fired a trusted manager, and argued constantly with his father. Richard grew furious. "You're making us look weak," Richard snapped at him over dinner. "Pull yourself together before you ruin this family's name." But Daniel couldn't. Every ringing phone made him jump. Every unopened envelope felt like a threat, and Michael ensured it never stopped. Anonymous calls at midnight, strange letters, whispers in the dark. Daniel was unraveling thread by thread. Charlotte noticed first. She watched her brother's decline with worry, but also suspicion. Something about the tension in the air didn't feel random. Someone was behind this. She could feel it. When she crossed paths with Michael again at the local bookstore a week later, she asked softly, "Do you ever get the feeling that this town is hiding something? Like someone's pulling the strings?" Michael's eyes held hers for a moment too long. "Every town has its secrets," he said quietly. "The question is, when those secrets come to light, who survives?" Her breath caught, but before she could respond, he turned and walked away. Back at his hotel that night, Michael laid out his next steps. Daniel was already on the edge. Soon he would push him further, until Richard and Evelyn began to question not just Daniel's competence, but the stability of the entire family. It was only the beginning, but already the Harringtons were starting to bleed. And Michael Caldwell, forgotten child. Buried heir was only just sharpening his knife. The Harrington estate was quieter than usual. For days, Daniel had been pacing the halls like a haunted man, muttering about unseen enemies and betrayal. Evelyn tried to soothe him, reminding him of his position, of his strength. But even she couldn't ignore the way his hands shook when he poured his nightly whiskey. Richard had no patience left. One evening, during dinner, he slammed his fist on the polished mahogany table. "Enough! You're embarrassing this family." Paranoia doesn't suit a Harrington. Daniel shot up from his chair, eyes bloodshot. "You don't understand. Someone's watching me. Someone's destroying everything." Charlotte flinched at her brother's outburst, while Evelyn looked away, her perfect facade cracking. Richard sneered, his voice cutting like steel. "If you can't handle pressure, then you don't deserve to carry this name." Michael heard every word later that night. His informant, maid he had quietly bribed, fed him details of the family arguments. Each line was another victory. He didn't need to raise a hand. The Harringtons were starting to destroy themselves. But his work was far from over. That week, Michael returned to the county records office. A clerk who owed him a favor slipped him an old file, yellowed with age. Inside were land deeds and legal papers from the 1980s. The very documents that had transferred Caldwell property into Harrington hands. As Michael sifted through them, his jaw tightened. The signatures were forged, the seals falsified. His father had never willingly signed away their legacy. There it was, the truth in black and white, murder and theft wrapped in paper and ink. Michael felt a cold fire in his chest. He could already imagine the headlines, Harrington Empire, built on fraud, but he didn't want to release it yet. Not until the timing was perfect. Not until the family was weak enough that the truth would destroy them completely. That night, he sat in the dim light of his hotel room, staring at the forged signatures. He remembered his mother's whisper, "Never forget who you are. Never forgive what they did." For the first time in years, he allowed himself to whisper his real name. Michael Caldwell? The sound of it filled the empty room like a vow. Meanwhile, Daniel's paranoia turned violent. He snapped at employees, accused his sister of spying on him, even screamed at his mother when she tried to comfort him. Evelyn, shaken, turned to Richard privately. "He's losing his mind," she said. "If this continues, he'll bring shame on all of us. Maybe he shouldn't be the one handling the businesses anymore." Richard stared at her, furious at the suggestion. But deep down, doubt had already taken root. Charlotte, however, noticed something the others didn't. She had seen Michael at several town events, now quiet, watchful, always on the edge of the crowd. There was something unsettling about him, something too precise in the way he observed everyone. She couldn't shake the feeling that his arrival and her brother's unraveling were connected. One afternoon, she confronted him at the local cafe. "You're not here for business, are you?" she asked, her voice steady though her heart raced. Michael looked up from his coffee, his expression unreadable. "What makes you say that?" She leaned closer. "Because you watch people the way a hunter watches prey. And because ever since you arrived, my family has been different." Michael allowed a small smile, but his eyes remained cold. "Every family has its reckoning, Charlotte. Some sooner than others." Her breath caught, and for a moment she felt as if she were standing too close to a flame. But before she could ask more, Michael stood and left, his shadow stretching long across the cafe floor. That night, Daniel received another envelope. Inside wasn't a photograph this time, but a single sheet of paper, a copy of the forged Caldwell deed, with one sentence scrawled beneath it in bold letters. "Your empire was built on blood." Daniel dropped the paper as if it burned him. His screams echoed through the halls of the Harrington estate, while Michael, standing on the hill outside with the wind at his back, watched the lights flicker in the mansion. The Harrington secrets were beginning to surface, and secrets had a way of devouring those who kept them. The Harrington estate no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a cage, and Daniel was the wild animal clawing at its bars. Servants whispered of his late-night rages, the broken bottles scattered across the marble floors, the holes punched into walls. He had become unpredictable, dangerous even to those who tried to help him. One night, when Evelyn approached him in his study, pleading with him to rest, Daniel snapped. He threw a crystal glass against the wall, shards scattering across the carpet. "Don't tell me to rest," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "You don't see it, do you? We're being hunted. Someone is tearing us apart, and you're all too blind to notice." Evelyn, shaken, backed away. "You're sick, Daniel. You need help." "I don't need help." His eyes blazed with madness. "I need answers. I'll find whoever's behind this, and when I do, I'll bury them." But Daniel didn't know the enemy lived closer than he could imagine. Meanwhile, Richard had grown tired of his son's decline. He met privately with his business partners, trying to assure them the Harrington empire was stable, but whispers were spreading, fast contracts falling through, financial irregularities, and now rumors of Daniel's instability. Some partners hesitated, others began to withdraw entirely. At dinner one evening, Evelyn pressed Richard again. "Can't you see what's happening? Daniel isn't fit to lead. He'll drag us all down." Richard's eyes narrowed. "So you'd rather put everything in Charlotte's hands?" "She doesn't have the stomach for it." "She has more sense than her brother," Evelyn snapped back. The room fell silent. For the first time in years, the Harrington patriarch and matriarch were openly at odds, and Michael's plan was working beautifully divide and weaken. Charlotte, however, was restless. The more chaos surrounded her family, the more her thoughts returned to the stranger, who had arrived in Raven Creek only weeks ago. Michael Carter. He was always watching, always too calm. Something about him gnawed at her. She found herself drawn to him despite her instincts. One afternoon, she spotted him again, this time near the old Caldwell property, the land that had been abandoned after her family claimed it decades ago. He stood there quietly, staring at the ruins of the farmhouse, the wind tugging at his coat. She approached cautiously. "What brings you out here?" "Hardly the place for a businessman." Michael didn't turn at first. His eyes stayed fixed on the crumbling house. "Places like this have stories. You can feel them in the air." Charlotte crossed her arms, uneasy. "Stories about the Caldwells, you mean? People still talk about them, you know, about what happened." At that, Michael finally looked at her. His gaze was sharp, piercing, but not unkind. "And what do they say? That they were betrayed? That they were destroyed by people they trusted?" She hesitated. "By my family." Michael's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than words. Charlotte searched his face, her pulse quickening. "You're not who you say you are you? There's something about you, something I can't place. But I know you're connected to all of this." Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it rises, demanding justice." Her breath caught. For a moment, she felt the urge to step back, to flee. But something in his voice, something wounded, held her still. She whispered, almost afraid of the answer. "And if justice means destroying my family?" Michael's eyes softened just slightly, though his words were hard as stone. "Then maybe your family was already destroyed long ago?" Before she could respond, he walked past her, leaving her trembling in the fading light. That night, Daniel descended further into madness. He accused his father of conspiring against him, his mother of plotting to remove him, and even Charlotte of spying on him. He stormed out of the estate, drunk and furious, vowing to find whoever was tormenting him. Michael watched from the shadows as Daniel's car tore down the highway, weaving recklessly. He followed at a distance, his headlights off, his expression calm. Daniel was unraveling, and soon Michael knew he wouldn't need to push anymore. The Harringtons were beginning to destroy themselves. And when the end came, it would be by Michael's hand or by the weight of their own sins crushing them from within. Daniel's spiral reached its breaking point. One stormy night, drunk and shaking with rage, he staggered into one of the Harringtons' smaller warehouses on the edge of town. The guards on duty hesitated when they saw him, his wild eyes, his unsteady hands clutching a pistol he had stolen from his father's study. "You," Daniel shouted at them. "You've been watching me, haven't you? You're part of it." Before they could answer, he fired a shot into the ceiling. The men froze, fear flooding the air. One of them tried to calm him, but Daniel shoved the barrel of the gun in his face. His words were incoherent, broken between curses and paranoid accusations. By the time Richard arrived, summoned in a panic, Daniel was on his knees, weeping and trembling, the gun still in his hand. Richard ripped the weapon away and struck his son across the face. "You're a disgrace," he bellowed. "You'll ruin everything I've built if you don't pull yourself together." Daniel only laughed a hollow, bitter sound that echoed through the empty warehouse. "You think you built this? You think you earned any of it?" "Lies, father. All of it lies." Richard froze. Evelyn, who had followed close behind, went pale. Daniel's words cut deeper than he realized, for the lie of their empire was indeed beginning to surface. The next morning, whispers spread across Raven Creek like wildfire. Daniel Harrington had lost control, pulled a gun on his own men. The family's reputation was crumbling. Business partners pulled away. Investors panicked, and for the first time, the Harrington name carried shame instead of power. Michael watched it all unfold with the patience of a predator. He planted rumors in the right ears, slipped documents into the hands of hungry journalists, and left just enough evidence to fuel suspicion. His web was tightening, and the Harringtons were the flies caught in the strands. But not everything was going according to plan. Charlotte confronted him again, this time with more fire in her voice. "It's you, isn't it? You're behind all of this. My brother's downfall, the whispers, the files that keep appearing. You've been pulling the strings. Michael regarded her carefully. For the first time, he saw not just suspicion in her eyes, but fear in something else, curiosity. You're asking the wrong questions, he said evenly. The real question is, why are there so many strings to pull? Why does the truth slip out so easily? As if it's been waiting all these years to be told? Charlotte's lips parted, but no words came. Deep down, she knew he was right. There were cracks in her family long before this man arrived. All he had done was widen them. Yet she couldn't stop herself from whispering, "Who are you?" Michael's jaw clenched. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to shout his name, to make her understand what her family had done to his. But the time wasn't right. Not yet? Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "When the truth comes out, Charlotte, you'll have to decide which side you're on. And trust me, it won't be easy." That night, Michael returned to his room. Spreading papers across the desk, forged deeds, photographs, old newspaper clippings. The story of the Harrington Empire was a story of blood and theft, and he was almost ready to reveal it to the world. But he wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. In his mind, he saw his father's broken face, his mother's tears, the silence of a home that had once been filled with laughter. Every move he made now was for them. Down the road, the Harrington mansion felt colder than ever. Evelyn slept alone in her room, her faith in Richard shaken. Richard buried himself in paperwork, trying desperately to salvage what remained. Daniel, confined after his outburst, raged against invisible enemies. And Charlotte sat awake in her bed, replaying Michael's words over and over, torn between fear of him and fascination with the truth he carried. The web was nearly complete, and soon Michael would strike the final blow. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside the Harrington estate. Rain lashed against the tall windows. Thunder rattled the chandeliers. And within those grand walls, the family was tearing itself apart. Daniel had slipped further into madness. Locked in his room after the warehouse incident, he had begun carving strange marks into the walls with a knife, muttering about shadows and betrayal. Servants avoided him, terrified of his sudden fits of violence. One evening, his shouting grew so loud that Charlotte rushed in, only to find him standing at the window, knife in hand, staring at the storm. "They're coming for us," he whispered. His eyes glistened with a feverish light. "The past is coming back, and it's going to eat us alive." Charlotte tried to calm him, but his words burrowed into her mind like thorns. Meanwhile, Evelyn and Richard's marriage was unraveling. In the library, their argument spilled into the open. "You've lost control," Evelyn hissed. "The business is collapsing, our son is a disgrace, and now the whole town whispers that we're frauds." Richard slammed a fist against the desk. "I'd built this empire from nothing." "From lies," Evelyn spat back. For the first time, her mask of cold grace shattered, and years of silence boiled into rage. "I kept your secrets, Richard. I stood by you while you buried the Caldwells, while you forged your papers and bribed officials, but now? Now it's all crumbling, and I won't fall with you." Richard froze. Evelyn had never spoken so openly before. For a moment, he saw fear in her eyes, not just fear of scandal, but fear of the truth finally clawing its way to the surface. Unbeknownst to them, Michael stood just outside the library, listening. Every word was confirmation, every accusation another piece of evidence. His parents had not died for nothing, the Harringtons were guilty, and the proof was spilling from their own lips. Later that night, Charlotte found Michael waiting at the edge of the Caldwell ruins again. The storm had quieted, but the ground was wet and the air sharp with the scent of rain. "You have to tell me," she said, her voice trembling. "Who are you really? Why are you doing this?" Michael studied her for a long moment. The truth pressed against his lips, but he forced himself to remain silent. Instead, he stepped closer until his face was inches from hers. "My name," he whispered, "is not Michael Carter." Charlotte's breath caught. "Then what?" Before he could finish, headlights cut across the ruins. A car skidded to a halt, and Daniel stumbled out, soaked in rain and stinking of whiskey. He had escaped confinement, the knife still clutched in his hand. His wild eyes darted between Michael and Charlotte. "You," he shouted, pointing the blade at Michael. "You're the ghost. You're the one tearing us apart." Charlotte tried to intervene. "Daniel, stop. He hasn't—" But Daniel lunged, slipping in the mud as he charged. Michael sidestepped swiftly, catching Daniel's wrist and twisting the knife free in one practiced motion. Daniel collapsed to the ground, gasping, half sobbing, half laughing. "You'll kill us all," Daniel muttered. The past is here." His voice broke into incoherent rambling as rain drenched his face. Charlotte looked at Michael with wide eyes. She saw the strength in him, the precision of his movements, the calmness with which he had disarmed her brother. He wasn't just some stranger. He was something far more dangerous. Michael dropped the knife into the mud, his voice low but steady. "Your brother sees what no one else wants to admit. The past is here, Charlotte, and it won't rest until justice is done." Charlotte shivered. The storm may have passed, but she knew the true storm was only beginning. That night, Richard received another envelope. Inside was a photograph and old picture of the Caldwell family, smiling in front of their farmhouse. Scrawled across the back were 4 words that made his blood run cold. "I am still here." Richard crushed the photo in his fist, his face pale. For the first time in decades, the unshakable Harrington patriarch felt fear. And Michael, standing in the shadows outside, whispered his real name into the night. Caldwell. The reckoning was coming. The night of reckoning came without mercy. The Harrington estate, once the proud symbol of wealth and power, stood cloaked in silence. Servants had fled. Business partners no longer called. What remained inside those walls was only fear, suspicion, and a crumbling empire. Richard Harrington sat in his study, a half-empty glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. His reflection in the window looked older than he remembered, haunted, cornered. The photograph he had received lay on the desk before him, the smiling Caldwell family staring back like ghosts. The doors creaked open. Michael stepped inside. No pretense this time. No false name. He wore no mask of politeness, no shadow of restraint. His eyes carried years of grief and fury. Richard rose slowly, setting the glass aside. "So," he said, his voice low, "the ghost finally shows himself." Michael's voice was steady. "Not a ghost, a son? The son of Thomas and Margaret Caldwell." The color drained from Richard's face, though he forced a bitter laugh. "You should have stayed buried with them. The world forgot the Caldwells a long time ago." Michael's jaw clenched. "I didn't forget. I lived every day with their absence, with the lies that destroyed them. I watched my father's land stolen, my family's name erased, while you built your empire on their graves." Evelyn appeared in the doorway, pale and trembling. Charlotte stood behind her, her face torn between fear and disbelief. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, his mind too fractured to witness the end. Richard's voice hardened. "Your father was weak. He didn't deserve that land. I took it because I could. That's the way the world works. Power belongs to those strong enough to claim it." Michael stepped closer, his hands curling into fists. "You murdered him. And you murdered my mother when you left her nothing but ashes." Richard sneered. "Collateral damage. Necessary sacrifices." The words were gasoline on fire. Michael's control snapped. He lunged forward, striking Richard across the face, sending him sprawling against the desk. Evelyn gasped, clutching Charlotte as chaos erupted. Richard staggered to his feet, blood on his lip, rage burning in his eyes. He snatched a letter opener from the desk and swung wildly, but Michael caught his wrist, twisting until the blade clattered to the floor. The 2 men grappled, decades of hatred exploding into violence. "You think this will bring them back?" Richard spat, struggling against Michael's strength. "Revenge won't give you peace." Michael slammed him against the desk, fury boiling over. "No, but it will give them justice." Charlotte cried out, rushing forward, but Evelyn held her back. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "It's too late. This has been coming for years." The struggle ended in one brutal motion. Richard slipped, crashing against the edge of the desk, his body crumpling to the floor. Silence followed, broken only by his labored breaths. Michael stood over him, chest heaving. He could end it now. One strike, one final act, and justice would be complete. But as he raised his hand, he caught Charlotte's eyes. She wasn't pleading for her father, she was pleading for him. "Don't," she whispered. "If you do this, you'll become him." The words pierced deeper than any blade. Michael froze, his breath ragged. He looked down at Richard, broken, beaten, yet alive. Killing him would be easy. Living with it would not. Michael stepped back, his voice heavy with finality. "Your empire is finished. The world will know what you did. The Harrington name will rot, and that will be worse than death." Richard tried to speak, but his voice cracked, a hollow shadow of the man he once was. Michael turned away, gathering the documents, the forged deeds, the proof of everything. He walked to the door, his steps slow but steady. Before leaving, he looked once more at Charlotte. For a moment, the fury in his eyes softened, replaced by something almost human. Then he was gone, swallowed by the night. Days later, headlines blazed across the nation. Harrington Empire built on fraud. Legacy collapses, investors fled, lawsuits mounted, and the family's wealth crumbled overnight. Richard Harrington retreated into isolation, Evelyn into silence. Daniel vanished completely, lost in his madness. Charlotte, however, remained left to face the ruins of her name and the memory of the man who had brought the truth to light. As for Michael Caldwell, he disappeared from Raven Creek as quietly as he had come. No one knew where he went, but whispers lingered in the town, of a ghost who returned, of justice long delayed but finally delivered. And somewhere, far from the ruins of both families, Michael stood beneath an open sky, whispering to the wind, "For you, Father. For you, Mother. It's done." But deep inside, he knew the truth. Revenge had a price. And though the Harringtons had paid theirs, Michael had paid his to the loss of his soul's peace, and the weight of a legacy he could never escape.